Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Rachel Shabby and the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, Alan Mendoza. Let's see, there's Alan. Rachel's having some problems, some tech problems, but we'll get her up as soon as we can. Alan's here with us. Alan, thank you for joining us. First, let's have a look at what's on some of the front pages. The Observer has spoken to senior officials in the food supply sector who allege that the government has handled the so-called pingdemic badly enough to make the situation actively worse. The Sunday People hears the problem of mass pinging has also affected border force staff, leading to substantial delays at Heathrow Airport. Although the delays at Heathrow Airport might be the least of your worries if you had cancelled holidays in France planned this summer, the Mail analyses the, quote, fiasco surrounding the Prime Minister's last-minute decision to enforce quarantine on return from France, even if you're double vaccinated. While the Star has fun at the expense of people who use teeth whiteners, which have apparently been in short supply because of widespread self-isolation. The Sunday Mirror understands the government intends to press ahead with vaccine passports at football stadiums, although clubs are reportedly worried that restricting the number of attendees could push them into financial difficulties. The Telegraph has the same story. Its headline mentions the Premier League, but if they're brought into effect, the admission policies would go as far down the rankings as the bottom of League Two. Scotland on Sunday carries testimony from hospitality workers who say in the wake of lockdown, their employers aren't doing enough to keep them safe from the dangers of COVID. The Express says the Prime Minister wants to give every victim of crime access to a named police officer who will handle their case and be a point of contact. While according to, there you go, the Sunday Times, some private schools are being accused of attempting to give their pupils an unfair advantage by lobbying top universities to give them places before their results are known. We are joined tonight, as I was saying, by Rachel Shabby. She's here, she sorted out her tech difficulties, and Alan Mendoza. Thank you so much for staying up and chatting to us. The pingdemic continues. I've heard it called Pingmageddon as well. I don't know which one I prefer. I think Pingmageddon. But good evening to you both. Let's start with the Observer. Alan, what do you make of this? Food Boss is saying that ministers are making supply chaos worse.
Well, it's a difficult one, isn't it? It's this whole pingdemic has taken over the country's sensibilities, and you can see this in the food supply conversation, because the government has seen obviously the concerns about shelves not being full in supermarkets, has tried to come up with a way of getting around that by excluding 10,000 from the whole self-isolation focus if they do the lateral testing in that way. But of course, others are now saying, but you're doing this is actually causing more problems rather than less. You're not linking through to the supermarkets. It's all very well to get the food on at least to the supermarkets, but then we can't get them onto the shelves because there's no staff there. So in a sense, it's a bit of a circular argument. We're going back to this whole point. Who should be self-isolating? Who ought to be self-isolating? Should we be moving this date line up from the 16th of August? And currently, we don't have many answers.
Rachel, what do you think? Because it is difficult, isn't it, to come up with some sort of coherent list at such short notice?
Well, I'm not saying it's not difficult, but that doesn't mean the government hasn't epically handled this in a chaotic, unpredictable and disruptive way, as indeed many in these sectors affected, not least the food industry, have been saying, as indeed Whitehall itself has been saying. And as for notice, well, the government announced that it was going to have this Freedom Day months ago, so it certainly had time to anticipate and predict this. A lot of people are pinging because we have a lot of infections in the population. 1 in 75 people has it. So let's not forget that is the source reason. But also, it does make sense that the government should have thought about this in a joined up way, and particularly with the food sector. So you can't just address one bit of the chain and expect the rest of it to be okay. Clearly it won't be, and it hasn't. And that's what the food sector is now warning about. But it is affecting other industries as well, not least the hospitality sector, where it's worth bearing in mind that a big chunk of sectors like hospitality, like food packing, these frontline workers, very young people, most of whom have yet to be vaccinated or most certainly double vaccinated. So again, we're placing this population at risk because of just government bungling, essentially.
Alan, do you agree with that?
I wouldn't say government bungling's the appropriate term to use here. You know, all the way through this, we've been wrestling with new situations, dramatic changes occurring at any time. You know, at one point, we all thought this would be the summer, we would all be free because we'd all be double vaccinated, at least well on the way, and then suddenly Delta variant, of course, takes over in that process. I think it's not fair to, you know, to slight the government in this way. The reality is there are very, very difficult choices to be made at every opportunity. And, you know, we are feeling our way through every new stage of this without data, without understanding properly how to tackle it. And I think the government's, you know, making the choice to try and keep as many people safe as possible for as long as possible in this whole process. Now, is it chaotic? Yes, it is. But to be honest, there's hardly been a stage of this pandemic in any country that hasn't been chaotic in this way. And once again, because of our situation here, having so many cases while still, of course, having the vaccinations being rolled out, you know, we're once again leading the world in this kind of point because nobody else is at the stage we're at. And in fact, it's worth noting that you look at some other countries, they've made very different choices at this point in time. What we need to do now is look at, I think, this date of August 16th. The one thing I'm a bit confused about is why on that date everything changes rather than now. Yes, maybe more people are double vaccinated then, but still I'm a bit confused about that aspect. And maybe that's something we'll hear more about from the government this week.
Sunday People on the front of their papers saying holiday border fast. Airport travellers had to queue for hours yesterday because of a border force pandemic. The Sunday Telegraph saying that it's also affecting the Met. But bin men get a reprieve. Rachel, if you don't think that this is what should have happened, it's chaotic, they've bungled it, what do you think they should have done?
I mean, I think it's absolutely absurd, borderline irresponsible to claim that we don't have data or understanding. We've had 18 months of, you know, WHO and leading scientists constantly providing data and understanding. It's worth pointing out that our government has consistently ignored WHO advice about how to deal with the pandemic, i.e. it did not build a test, trace, and isolate system that worked. Rather, it squandered £37 billion on the private sector.
That's not ignoring it, is it? I mean, they did build a test, trace and isolate system.
They sent it to the private sector who did not know what they were doing, and which a parliamentary select committee said had no discernible effect whatsoever. So, no, they didn't ignore it. Instead, they used it as an opportunity to siphon off £37 billion to private donors, but also even measures like financially supporting people who need to self-isolate so that they are able to do so. Just imagine if a chunk of that 37 billion had instead been offered as assistance to help people who need to self-isolate, what a difference that might have been. So I do think that along the way, there are definitely measurable, tangible things that the government could have done and ignored, and it would be irresponsible of us to pretend that that's not the case.
And go ahead, I see you shaking your head.
Well, you know, I read an article today which kind of sums up why Rachel's points here are just a bit silly, I'm sorry to say, because if you look at the history of the test trace program, a lot of complaints at the start, oh, it's not fit for purpose, it's not working. And now, of course, the complaints are, it's working too well, we're all being pinged, it's all working, everyone knows who's been in contact with in this way. It's the only program, unfortunately, where it's slammed for not working well and working too well in this regard. The reality is that the program is working very well, as we say now, too well, perhaps, in terms of how that kind of works and connects up. And looking back on it, there will be this whole inquest to look into what happened over the course of the pandemic. And it's all very well for us to sit here in our, you know, tastefully created homes. Rachel, I do admire your bookcase there, some good books on there, but, you know, and make those points. The reality is that's going to have to come out in a full discussion, in a full investigation as to what happened 12 months ago, 16 months ago, 8 months ago in this crisis. What we have to look at is what's happening now, and that's what's most important.
But it's interesting, Rachel, what you mentioned it. We spoke to Jenny Harries yesterday, who said we have this pingdemic because we have a pandemic. Do you feel that the sense, the issue at heart gets lost, that people are getting pinged because they're coming into contact with people who tested positive, and whether or not they have to self-isolate or they're going to spread this virus, bottom line.
Absolutely. The reason people are getting pinged is precisely as the scientists are saying. And by the way, it really doesn't matter what I, in my, home next to my bookcase think. It doesn't matter at all. What matters is what the scientists are saying. And as you say, the scientists are saying the reason so many people are getting pinged is because 1 in 75 in the population has COVID. So, if I were to take a bus or to go on a train, 1 in 75 people there would have COVID. So, of course, we're going to get pinged more. And that's the thing that we've lost sight of. Now, of course, as well, the vaccine is having an effect on that. It is meaning that not all of those will translate into hospitalizations, but certainly a high number of them are. High enough for the NHS to now be saying, look, we need to rededicate some of our emergency wards and intensive wards to COVID, which means that they're not doing those other vital medical treatments, including cancer, of which there is a huge backlog. So there is many and varied bad consequences of the government having let the virus rip through the population now and having decided that that is acceptable. There are consequences to that, and we need to discuss that.
Alan, do you think that there is an argument to be had for if they were going to open everything up on the 16th of August, that it should have coincided, oops, I'm throwing my pen across the studio here, that they should have had, not this gap. If everyone doesn't have to self-isolate from the 16th of August, why don't you just keep the social restrictions in place until that day?
Well, this is, I think, there is confusion about this aspect of it, I think. Look, we were working towards a timetable where, Freedom Day, the so-called Freedom Day would occur. And, the government had to make a difficult choice about where it was going to draw the line on these issues. And I think what it's done has been to look at the link between, obviously, vaccinations, hospitalizations and deaths. Now, Rachel says that, it's high. It's not high. It's actually a very low link, as we know, in the sense of if you compare this number of cases with the hospitalizations, yes, there are people being hospitalized and sadly dying, absolutely. But it's nowhere near a fraction of what was happening back in December, January. And so the government felt able to release the restrictions on that basis. And they're not wrong on that side. The science clearly shows that the vaccination program has, kind of weakened that link dramatically. So from that point of view, it was right, I think, to loosen the restrictions.
Briefly, Alan, because we've got to go to break.
Yeah, sure. Well, where we are now quickly is basically, I think we have to, I would actually move the time of the restrictions forward. Ending in terms of self-isolation, saying, look, we trusted the vaccine, let's keep on trusting the vaccine. That's where we should be going from now.
Okay, right. Let's start with the Sunday Express. Rachel, what is this about? Every victim is to have a named police officer. So that sounds like it's going to work.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that's going to work, to be honest. I'm not sure it's particularly thought through, but this is part of the PM's tackling crime, which obviously the government likes to trumpet about quite often because that's red meat to its base, although it rarely does follow through. And in this case, the Prime Minister is saying, experiencing crime is a horrible and traumatic experience, of course, and that victims of crime should have access to a police officer, like a direct line, whether that's by phone or by email, so that they can have one-to-one contact at a really tough time.
Alan, what do you think? I mean, this is one of his manifesto pledges, isn't it? Back in 2019, he's actually writing in the Sunday Express.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'm getting the impression Rachel's not a fan of the government very much. I think, it's not red meat to the base. This is, people who've suffered crime, want to have action about crime and sometimes are worried about how essentially that, they get through to the police in a consistent and, kind of repeated manner. Now, there are, of course, implementation questions about this. You're going to have to look at how on earth you're going to get a named police officer in each place to be in contact with a victim of crime. But on the surface of it, it's a great idea, because what people will have is the ability to speak to one person, follow it up with one person, see their case through, and they will have that, but rather than being passed around different nameless faces in different places. So from that perspective, I think it's to be encouraged, although as always, the devil will be in the detail.
Now, Alan, I'm going to stay with you on this one because you were particularly excited about this story, as were lots of people on Twitter. Please explain to us about this very real and damaging shortage on the front of the Star.
Well, I think that this is the story of the day, basically. It looks like we have a shortage of teeth whitening kits in this country. And I've got to be honest, if you look at those, kind of celebs out there, Simon Cowell in particular, we are, what will happen without being dazzled when you turn on a TV screen or look in a paper? I think we will all, kind of lose faith in celebrity as a result of this.
Rachel, does anyone know why we have a shortage of these kits? Very briefly, has anyone read the actual story? I don't have page 4 and 5.
I'd like to know why there's a horse on the front of that. But I think it's because apparently people have been doing self-whitening at home in lockdown.
They've got nothing else to do.
There's been an increased demand.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's end it on that.